This brings us to the most speculative part, the concept of the noosphere and the question of the transcendent absolute. It seems to me that the idea of an informational field enveloping the Earth and connected to the thoughts of all living beings is, alongside the atmospheric motif emphasized at the outset, one of the elements that most capture the player's attention. Even though with each new installment of the trilogy it is mentioned less and less, and ever more obliquely. What further draws interest is the fact that, in contrast to the territorial spread of packs and clans, in the case of sea consciousness we witness an effort toward overcoming the previous state of humanity, something that looks like the uploading of consciousness into the very fabric of existence. If we build on what has already been said, such a development, through a combination of coordinating selected minds and controlling the rest, would effectively entail the transmutation of the metaphorical collective body discussed in the segment on factions into a true unification through a collective consciousness operating within the noosphere. In doing so, we also open the question of the fate of sentient beings amid the relentless evolutionary march, in this case toward more complex forms, where instead of territorial expansion and colonization of galaxy, we are presented with transcendence as a result of the search for alternative realities. In both cases, the inspiration stems from the writings and reflections of great thinkers, albeit in altered form. Thus, the noosphere is linked to Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and Vladimir Vernadsky, though their ideas, rooted in social or ecological abstraction, are transformed in the video game into a vision of a physical layer of information encasing the Earth, tangible, though invisible. On the other hand, we encounter the works of Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, whose notions of the transcendence of cosmic intelligence were originally dismissed as mysticism, yet through the strange twist of history eventually gained renewed momentum in theories of singularity and informational transition. In this regard, we can again invoke Teilhard's idea of the omega point as the culmination of noogenesis, which finds support in the conclusions drawn from Tsiolkovsky's panpsychism and his monistic idea of the inevitable unification of individual elements into a complex whole guided by a single will. But to fully grasp all of this, we must revisit Teilhard de Chardin's orthogenetic vision, as well as what we have referred to as the path of cognition. Returning to the three stations that constitute this path, we notice that they reflect two phenomena, quantitative and qualitative ascent. In the first stage, where meaning is seen, we encounter limited gatherings around the manifest, something akin to tribal communities centered on a totem, whose capacity for expansion is confined to a narrow area around their idol. The physical presence of both the idol and the tribe is a prerequisite for the existence of a shared belief system. In the second stage, where meaning is imagined, the idol is displaced from the physical realm, transformed into a more or less fluid abstraction, thereby greatly increasing its reach. Yet the power of the idea is proportional to the strength and spread of its carriers. A physical space in which the idea holds sway must still exist, because although the totem is removed from the observable, the interpreters and believers are not. Finally, we reach the stage where meaning is embodied. Homo sapiens becomes the creator by supposedly transcending physical existence, and his scope becomes potentially boundless as he merges with the reality he weaves and, like the zone itself, expands unstoppably with it. History, however, shows us that this process of increasing complexity and unification also entails an expenditure of energy that results in regression, a breakdown that becomes more dramatic and abrupt the more complex the community is. Yet it appears that there is a kind of pulsation of life, human life in this case, that passes through phases of expansion and contraction, moving toward increasingly complex forms. In that light, it is not enough to point only to reach or extension, but also to a kind of ascent. Viewed from this perspective, the additive power of living matter is shaped by directed complexification, orthogenesis, which leads to both its increasing complexity and its instability or transformation of form. And although we do not observe any significant changes in individual human beings, we can clearly discern qualitative shifts between the tribe in nature, the clan within society, and the sea consciousness within the zone. The transition from one stage to the next implies both an increase in spatial reach and a rise in complexity. Within the world of Stalker, the focus lies primarily on the clans as ideological or operational units within a broader social order situated between a symbolic beginning and a presumed end. On the fringes of their communities lie entities of lesser complexity and narrower scope, the packs. These exist in a pre-tribal stage as we perceive it, lacking any potential for reflection or any need to seek meaning, yet undoubtedly capable of instinctive organization within a broader operational system. Coordinated action here results from natural forces, emerging from random trials and the survival of behavioral mechanisms that produce the best outcomes. There is no reflective consciousness. Individuals act on instinct. From time to time, especially near the duty base in Rostock, we witness their unconscious attempts to break through checkpoints and enter human settlements. But there they encounter a force they cannot comprehend, firearms, so they retreat into the spaces between inhabited zones. Their capacities are limited, however dangerous they may be to individual stalkers, and the unconscious order holds as long as the pack leader lives. On the other hand, clans, as entities of higher complexity and wider reach, framed by a broader social order, exist on the periphery of the realm controlled by the sea consciousness. Guided by reflective awareness, they seek to coordinate their efforts through the creation and verbalization of systems of ideas, struggling for the victory of those they consider just. From time to time, they attempt to break through the boundaries and enter the space occupied by the transcendent entity known as the collective consciousness. But there, they encounter a force they cannot comprehend, the brain scorcher, and retreat back to the margins, at least until S.T.A.L.K.E.R disables it. Unlike the pack, reflective consciousness allows the protagonist and his associates to interpret this device and overcome the challenge. The waves of discharges, emissions, bear witness to sea consciousness's efforts to cleanse the zone it considers its own, or at the very least to discourage the clans from crossing certain thresholds. It represents a third force, an entity of the highest complexity and reach, capable to some extent of transmuting its own thoughts into physical reality, bypassing the intermediate steps of verbalization and coordination of manifest activity. Thus, we arrive at a sequence where in the background of the landscape lies the realm of unconscious organization, where action is instinctively carried out as a group, shaped primarily by the random forces of nature, the point from which we came. In the foreground lies the realm of conscious organization into active entities, shaped primarily by social forces and ideas, the point at which we currently stand. Finally, all of this is transcended by the realm of the ultimate intelligence, in which human will seemingly overcomes natural forces, the point toward which we are supposedly heading. It becomes clear then that beneath the surface lies the idea that evolution may not be a random sequence of trials producing random outcomes, but rather that there may be a path or even a purpose. And that purpose in the world of Stalker appears as a synthesis, an organization that culminates in unity, which characterizes the point of outcome, or the omega point. As Chardin put it, all our difficulties and repulsions as regards the opposition between the all and the person would be dissipated if only we understood that, by structure, the noosphere, and more generally the world, represent a whole that is not only closed but also centered. Because it contains and engenders consciousness, space-time is necessarily of a convergent nature. Accordingly, its enormous layers, followed in the right direction, must somewhere ahead become involuted to a point which we might call omega, which fuses and consumes them integrally in itself. However immense the sphere of the world may be, it only exists and is finally perceptible in the direction in which its radii meet, even if this were beyond time and space altogether. Better still, the more immense this sphere, the richer and deeper, and hence the more conscious is the point at which the volume of being that it embraces is concentrated. Because the mind, seen from our side, is essentially the power of synthesis and organization. Seen from this point of view, the universe, without losing any of its immensity and thus without suffering any anthropomorphism, begins to take shape. Since to think it, undergo it, and make it act, it is beyond our souls that we must look, not the other way around. In the perspective of a noogenesis, time and space become truly humanized, or rather superhumanized. Far from being mutually exclusive, the universal and personal, that is to say the centered, grow in the same direction and culminate simultaneously in each other. It is therefore a mistake to look for the extension of our being or of the noosphere in the impersonal. The future universal could not be anything else but a hyperpersonal at the omega point. Thus, it would be a mistake to represent omega to ourselves simply as a center born of the fusion of elements which it collects or annihilating them in itself. By its structure, omega, in its ultimate principle, can only be a distinct center radiating at the core of a system of centers, a grouping in which personalization of the all and personalizations of the elements reach their maximum simultaneously and without merging under the influence of a supremely autonomous focus of union. That is the only picture which emerges when we try to apply the notion of collectivity with remorseless logic to a granular whole of thoughts. The process of evolution then culminates in unification into the suprapersonal, gathering around a central point of focus, the final point of unity toward which all living beings strive. The impersonality of the pack-like world and the personality of individual consciousnesses, connected by ideas and actions, evolve into a new mode of being. This is a superconsciousness that integrates whole existence and represents Teilhard de Chardin's attempt to reconcile theology and science. Evolution does not end in entropy and dissipation, but in ultimate intelligence.